Welcome to episode 4 of Modern Monarch. I am your host, Eddie Mead, aka Elmer. Everything here you hear that is not a quote from something is my opinion. I am an independent musician, songwriter, parapolitics researcher, esoterica enthusiast, and Montauk boy. This podcast will mainly cover such topics as mind control, ritual abuse, mental illness, substance abuse and addiction, music, sus Wisconsin, and more, viewed through a lens of dialectical materialism. I will maintain a balanced approach of presenting grounded research based on extensive reading and people's personal experiences. It will especially focus on a specific investigation of mine into decades-long countrywide conspiracies. As I explain, you will come to know why I began this podcast in the first place. Before we pick up where we left off in part 1, this is a content warning. This show contains descriptions of the abuse of children. It is not easy to hear, and it was not easy to read.
If I did not want to at least end this episode with some semi-detailed material on Monarch, we would still be talking about American and Soviet submarine telepathy. We received a little enlightenment on Estabrooks with that excerpt, though, and through him we can learn and confirm plenty about the topics of today's show. I will excerpt a few paragraphs from the G.H. Estabrooks chapter of Dr. Colin A. Ross, MD's book, The CIA Doctors Now, skipping over stuff that we can return to another time. Quote, Dr. Estabrooks wrote many articles and books, including Man, the Mechanical Misfit, Hypnotism, Spiritism, and the Future of the Human Mind. He studied multiple personality very carefully. In his book Spiritism, Dr. Estabrooks describes experiments done to create multiple personality by a U.S. military psychiatrist, Dr. P.L. Harriman. Dr. Harriman did not claim that any of his experimental multiple personality subjects were used in actual operations. In his book Hypnotism, Dr. Estabrooks states that the creation of experimental multiple personality for operational use in military subjects, whom he refers to as super spies, is ethical because of the demands of war. In a May 13, 1968 article in the Providence Evening Bulletin, Estabrooks is described as a former consultant for the FBI and CIA, and is quoted as saying that, quote within quote, the key to creating an effective spy or assassin rests in splitting a man's personality or creating multi-personality with the aid of hypnotism. This is not science fiction. This has and is being done. I have done it. End quote within quote. In an obituary in the January 6, 1974 Syracuse Herald-American, the writer states, quote within quote, but he knew the power of what he called my curious little research hobby. Once I felt he was ready to tell me about his experiences in the war, how hypnotism might have been used in early Manchurian Candidate fashion as a weapon of psychological warfare. But then he drew back to the style of conversation that stops just short of major revelation. You were left imagining all the cats struggling to be released from that bag of his. End quote within quote. The curious little research hobby was the experimental creation of multiple personality for operational use by the military. The Artichoke/Bluebird documents contain a copy of Dr. Estabrooks' proposal to the CIA dated June 22, 1954. Although all names are whited out in the document, it is definitely written by Dr. Estabrooks for the following reasons. The writing style is characteristic, the vocabulary is characteristic, the content is characteristic, the time frame is correct, and the whited out name occupies the correct number of spaces to spell Estabrooks. Dr. Estabrooks' proposal and commentary from the CIA read as follows, with spelling, punctuation, and grammatical errors uncorrected. The military application of hypnotism to white it out, from white it out. I choose 2 practical applications from many with which to illustrate my proposition. 1. The safeguarding of the messages entrusted to couriers. In deep hypnosis, the subject, military or civilian, can be given a message to be delivered to, say, Colonel X in Berlin. The subject may then be sent to Berlin on any perfectly routine assignment. The message will be perfectly safe and will be delivered to the proper person because A. The subject will have no memory whatsoever in the waking state as to the nature and contents of the message. B. It can be arranged that the subject will have no knowledge of ever having been hypnotized. C. It can be arranged that no one beside Colonel X in Berlin can hypnotize the subject and recover the message. End quote. George, what made you decide to use Colonel X in Berlin as an example? Just cannot stop thinking about your Nazi buddies, I guess. Anyhow, he refers to this supposedly hypothetical Colonel X again in that proposal, but I am going to hop to later in the Estabrooks chapter, where there is wilder and more concerning information. Quote, in a 1971 article in Science Digest, Dr. Estabrooks claimed to have created hypnotic couriers and counterintelligence agents for operational use during World War II. Quote within quote. One of the most fascinating but dangerous applications of hypnosis is its use in military intelligence. This is a field with which I am familiar through formulating guidelines for the techniques used by the United States in 2 world wars. End quote within quote. End quote. Wait. Sorry for stopping again, but did G.H. Estabrooks just confirm for us that mind control programming was occurring in World War I? Yes, I believe he did. When he was 19, he became the youngest commissioned officer in the 1st Canadian Division, so he was old enough and over in Europe fighting. Also, while this does not stretch back quite that far, his communication with the U.S. Military Intelligence Division dates back to 1924. I think earlier I did an okay job showing that mind control during the First World War was a possibility, but he just came right out and said it, and specifically implicates the United States. Well, thanks, George, I suppose. Now, the final 3 or 4 paragraphs. Quote, Dr. Estabrooks did experiments on children. These were conducted at Rome State School in Rome, New York, with the approval of the superintendent in a letter dated December 19, 1935. Estabrooks also did experiments on children at St. John's Orphan Asylum and the House of the Good Shepherd, run by the Utica Community Chest in Utica, New York. The director of the Utica Community Chest, A.J. Derbyshire, told Dr. Estabrooks in a letter dated December 7, 1935, that he could supply 50 children aged 9 to 12. This was to be facilitated by a sister Callista. Dr. Estabrooks corresponded with J. Edgar Hoover about using hypnosis to interrogate juvenile delinquents and applied to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare for a research grant. He also wrote to Hoover on June 8, 1936, about the possibility of combining drugs with hypnosis. In August 11, 1959 correspondence with Murray Aborn, Ph.D., Executive Secretary, Mental Health Study Section, Division of Research Grants, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, Estabrooks wrote, quote within quote, by preference, I would hope to obtain the services full-time of a competent clinical psychologist working with a psychiatric consultant and a man well-versed in the use of hypnotism with children. This is a rather specialized field. There are 2 pediatricians in this area, both, of course, MDs, who have had extensive practice in hypnosis, but they also have their regular practices. I doubt if this would be satisfactory. I am quite convinced I can obtain the clinical psychologist in question from, say, the clinic at Johns Hopkins, from the George Washington Medical School, from the Harvard or Yale medical schools. He will, of course, occupy a crucial position and should come very well recommended, end quote, within quote. Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and Yale were all MKUltra institutions. Given the military, intelligence, and academic connections of Dr. Estabrooks, and the fact that all his techniques and results were achieved in real-life simulations under BLUEBIRD and Artichoke, it is probable that his claims to have created and handled Manchurian candidates during World War II are accurate and factual. His experimentation on children raises the possibility that he or other investigators have attempted to create Manchurian candidates in children. Such a possibility might seem far-fetched until one considers the LSD, biological, and radiation experiments conducted on children, the effects on children of the Tuskegee syphilis study, and the fact that 4 MKUltra subprojects were on children, and the fact that hypnotic subjects described in BLUEBIRD and Artichoke documents included girls 19 years of age. Dr. Estabrooks is the only psychiatrist or psychologist to have claimed in public that he created Manchurian candidates. End quote. Those last 2 projects mentioned were transitioned into MKUltra, which the CIA created on April 3, 1953. For 11 years, 2 months, and 4 days, MKUltra doctors experimented on both children and adults, subjecting them to what could be described as medical torture. The only thing that changed after that period of time was the name of the project, because on June 7, 1964, it became MKSEARCH. As drugs and technology evolved, so did the experiments, which continued. Dr. Ross wrote that 4 of the MKUltra subprojects run by the CIA involved children. Subproject 103 in particular is interesting because it reminds me again of AIC, or American International College, when I read this paragraph. Quote, Subproject 103 was conducted by Robert Cormack and A.B. Christofferson at the Children's International Summer Villages, Inc. in Maine. The subjects were 16 to 21 years of age and were there for a reunion. All had attended the camp in previous years as 11-year-olds. The academic purpose of the project was to study how children communicate when they do not share a common language. The CIA was interested in the project as cover for establishing relationships with children from a variety of countries. Obviously, the intent was to recruit them as agents or assets. A memorandum for the record from the Subproject 103 documents dated 10th of December 1959 states that it is felt that this project will support the whited out need for cover. In addition, it will assist in the identification of promising young foreign nationals and U.S. nationals, many of whom are now in their late teens, who may at any time be of direct interest to the agency. No cleared or witting persons are concerned with the conduct of this project. End quote. So, a bunch of young adults from around the world were brought to the United States and the CIA wanted to recruit them. Listener, are you also reminded of the American International College participating in the Marshall Plan by hosting all of those skilled artisans from Europe after World War II? There are MKUltra contracts in a table towards the end of the book, including the one for Subproject 103 at the Children's International Summer Villages, Inc. It is not a complete list due to certain info still being classified. I will list some interesting ones, relevant to this show's past and future. A couple that seem relatable to AIC and the Curtis Blake Learning Services caught my attention, as well as some that seem applicable to Project Monarch, Montauk, and even the drug trafficking conspiracies we have covered. I will tell you the number in the table, the contractor, security status, institution, year, funding amount, and topic. Note that the author, Dr. Ross, informs us that when a security status is not stated, it is probable that the investigators in the subproject had top secret clearance. Here are a few of them. Quote, 2. Contractor James Hamilton, status top secret. Institution Stanford University, year 1953, funding amount $4,650. Topic: possible synergistic action of drugs which may be appropriate for use in abolishing consciousness. 3. George White, top secret, Bureau of Narcotics, 1953, $8,875. Construction of a safe house for prostitution. 4. John Mulholland, status is blank. Institution self-employed, 1953, $4,132.27. Delivery of substances in field operations. 5. Alden Sears, top secret, University of Denver and University of Minnesota, 1956, $12,139.65. Hypnosis experiments including recall of hypnotically acquired information by very specific signals. 14. George White, top secret, Bureau of Narcotics, 1953, $3,500. Construction of a safe house for prostitution. 15. John Mulholland, status blank. Institution self-employed. Year 1954, $2,370. Continuation of subproject 4. 18. Contractor blank, status blank. Institution Eli Lilly, 1953, $400,000. Manufacturing LSD. 19. John Mulholland, status blank, self-employed, 1954, $1,800. Extension of subproject 4. 28. Carl Pfeiffer, top secret, Emory University, 1954, $24,996.40. Effects of central nervous system depressant drugs in animals and man. 29. Alden Sears, top secret, University of Denver, 1954, $17,388.80. Hypnosis. 34. John Mulholland, blank, self-employed, 1954, $1,800. Continuation of subprojects 4, 15, and 19. 39. Contractor blank, status top secret. Iona State Hospital Psychopathic Clinic, 1955, $30,000. Drug testing on prisoners and sexual psychopaths, including interrogation with hypnosis, LSD, and marijuana. 42. George White, top secret, Bureau of Narcotics, 1955, $127,110. Construction of a safe house for prostitution. 43. Louis Jolyon West, top secret, University of Oklahoma, 1954, $20,800. Studies of dissociated states. 45. Charles Geschichter, top secret, National Institute of Health, 1956, $133,000. Development of materials and techniques for the production of maximum levels of physical and emotional stress in human beings. 46. Harold Hodge, top secret, Public Health Service, 1953, $185,650. Radioactive tagging studies of LSD and tetrahydrocannabinol. 47. Carl Pfeiffer, top secret, New Jersey Neuropsychiatric Institute and Emory University and Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, 1955, $45,555.22, LSD testing. 51. James Moore, top secret, University of Delaware, 1957, $38,502. Synthesis and testing of compounds from plants and fungi and ceremonial mushrooms. 53. Contractor is blank, status top secret, institution is blank, year 1955, $9,300. Literature review, attend a meeting on Russian and U.S. psychopharmacology. 57. Contractor blank, top secret, George Washington University, 1956, $32,858. Sleep and insomnia studies, including effects of sensory deprivation. 60. Contractor blank, top secret, Human Ecology Fund, 1961, $185,607. Lip reading and graphology and a report on truth drugs. 62. Maitland Baldwin, status blank, National Institutes of Health, 1956, $9,750. Stimulation of monkeys' brains by radio frequencies. 63. Robert Hyde, top secret, institution blank, 1961, $5,580. Field observations in bars concerning alcohol and psychotomimetics. 68. Ewan Cameron, status unwitting, institution McGill University, 1957, $38,180. The effects upon human behavior of the repetition of verbal signals. 74. Carl Rogers, top secret, University of Wisconsin, 1958, $15,000. Biological correlates of emotion in psychotherapy clients. 84. Martin Orne, top secret, Harvard University, 1960, $34,000. The nature of special states of consciousness and trance states. 85. Contractor blank, top secret, Stanford University, 1958, $1,040. Human blood group research for identification of agents. 90. Contractor blank, status unwitting, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 1958, $12,000. A study of how to recruit foreign scientists as intelligence agents. 94. Contractor blank, top secret, BioResearch Inc. and Panoramic Research Inc., 1959, $57,431.82. Brain stimulation studies, remote control of animal behavior. 97. Carl Rogers, top secret, University of Wisconsin, 1959, $8,750. Personality change in psychotherapy of schizophrenics. 109. Contractor blank, top secret, institution blank, 1960, $89,969.60. Drug development of agents to control human behavior. 112. Melvin DeFleur, unwitting, University of Indiana, 1961, $6,056.66. Young children's understanding of occupational roles. 119. Saul Sells, unwitting, Texas Christian University, 1960, $6,370. Techniques of activation of the human organism by remote electronic means. 122. Contractor blank, unwitting, institution blank, 1960, $2,000. Brain studies in cat neurokinin research. 128. Contractor blank, status blank, institution blank, 1960, $9,000. Rapid hypnotic induction in simulated and real operational settings. 132. Contractor blank, top secret, Bureau of Narcotics, 1961, $30,000. Construction of a safe house for prostitution. 134. Contractor blank, unwitting, institution blank, 1961, $22,000. Physique and intelligence. 1936. Contractor blank, unwitting, institution blank, 1961, $8,579. Experimental analysis of extrasensory perception. And 142. Contractor blank, top secret, institution blank, 1962, $7,500. electric stimulation of the brain in cold-blooded animals. End quote. George White received a lot of money to construct that safe house for prostitution. The purpose was Operation Midnight Climax, during which pimps, prostitutes, and customers were unwittingly dosed with drugs, and the effects were observed, including with the use of one-way mirrors and video cameras. MKSEARCH ran for 8 years until June in 1972, the same year the study in Tuskegee ended. Apparently, all of its subprojects involved developing and testing mind-control drugs. Richard Helms, the CIA director during that time, ordered that the files for MKULTRA and MKSEARCH be shredded. The CIA had other, even lesser-known mind control projects including Project Chatter, QK Hilltop, MK Delta, Third Chance, Derby Hat, MK Often, MK Chickwit, Stargate, MK Naomi, Project Whitecoat, MH Chaos, and MK Pilot. DXM was first tested during MK Pilot at the United States Narcotic Farm in Lexington, Kentucky. It is considered similar to other dissociative anesthetics such as ketamine and PCP, the latter being tested on schizophrenics by Dr. Jacques Gottlieb, unrelated to MKUltra director Sidney Gottlieb, with funding by the Scottish Rite Committee for Research on Schizophrenia appearing again in our story. Around 1958, DXM became available as an over-the-counter drug, and in the 1960s, the CIA pushed LSD and PCP onto the streets. Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, a contractor mentioned in that table, was also funded by the Scottish Rite Freemasons. So was John C. Whitehorn, professor and director of the Johns Hopkins University Department of Psychiatry. He was a speaker at a conference on research in schizophrenia on October 7, 1950 at Boston University School of Medicine. It was sponsored by the Supreme Council, 33 Degree Scottish Rite, Northern Masonic Jurisdiction, USA. Other speakers included the Nazi Dr. Franz Kallmann, as well as Dr. Hudson Hoagland, who 32nd degree Mason G.H. Estabrooks recommended to J. Edgar Hoover.
If you listened to part 1 of this, you will recall
that even the Nazis found Franz Kallmann's theories on schizophrenia intolerable because they implied that many Aryan Nazis were carrying a recessive gene for schizophrenia. He emigrated to the U.S. in 1933 and recommended eugenics programs to the U.S. and state governments. Seymour S. Ketty, chairman of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins from 1961 to 1962, attended that Freemason-funded conference as well. He was also chairman of NASA's Bioscience Advisory Committee and a member of the Scottish Rite Schizophrenia Research Committee. He participated in a Scottish Rite conference at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York on November 8th and 9th, 1958, chairing a morning session on the 8th. Nazi Franz Kallmann, Dr. John Whitehorn, Dr. Jacques Gottlieb, and Dr. Hudson Hoagland all presented at that conference. Dr. Seymour Ketty did LSD research at the National Institute of Mental Health with Dr. Louis Sokoloff. The Supreme Council, Scottish Rite, Northern Masonic Jurisdiction funded Ketty's work on barbiturate semi-narcosis, insulin coma, and electric shock. Dr. Robert Smith at the Texas Research Institute of Mental Sciences, or TRIMS, in Houston, received Scottish Rite Foundation funding to give PCP to research subjects in 1977 and 1979. Also in 1979, NASA provided funding to a Dr. Fenimore at TRIMS to develop a scopolamine radioimmunoassay. Scopolamine was used by the U.S. Army as a mind control drug and is infamous for its memory-erasing properties. Finally, another little piece of proof about World War I mind control. Dr. Winfrid Overholser Sr., the chairman of the Scottish Rite Research Committee, saw military service in that war and wrote in his diary while in a field hospital in France, quote, "We are using suggestion and hypnosis when it is possible," end quote. As you can tell, high-level Freemasons, the CIA, military, universities, and NASA were all running wild with mind control experimentation for many decades, up into the 1980s even. The book we have been extensively quoting from says that children as young as 5 years old were subjected to LSD experiments. Children as young as 11 had brain electrodes implanted in them. I will tell you that Project Monarch began early in that period of time and that both of those methods were used in its mind control programming. One paragraph above where that is said, it states that paranormal experiments under the Stargate program continued until 1984. Although the author does not mention Project Montauk by name, this is right around the time that some researchers think that the project was discontinued. It is the year in which the surface of the Montauk Air Force Station was donated to the state of New York. The project was based at the documented subterranean facility there, though, and better researchers have presented evidence that there was only a temporary discontinuation of Project Montauk. Don't worry, we will get there. From Tracy R. Twyman's Mind-Controlled Sex Slaves and the CIA, quote, "It is well known now in most literate circles, from declassified documents available through the Freedom of Information Act, that the CIA engaged in a number of covert experiments in mind control, often on unwitting subjects, throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s as part of a program known as MKULTRA. Thus, for example, we have the familiar stories of soldiers in Vietnam being subjected to involuntary testing of the effects of LSD, and other drugs on battlefield performance. MKUltra had its roots in Project Paperclip, a post-World War II operation authorized by Harry Truman, in which top scientists from Nazi Germany were smuggled into the United States to work with NASA, the military, and the intelligence community. Their newly acquired knowledge of mind control techniques had come from their experiments on prisoners in Nazi concentration camps, in which, according to experts, they learned of the effects of the calculated use of torture, drugs, hypnotism, electroshock, and sleep deprivation on an individual personality. According to some, the result was found to be a fragmenting of the personality into separate components which are unaware of one another, creating what is known today as multiple personality disorder, or by the more recent clinically accepted term, dissociative identity disorder. The individual personality components could then be programmed to perform certain tasks, much like a computer. According to former FBI agent and mind control expert Ted Gunderson, quote within quote, "It's a combination of torture, hypnosis, drugs. And what happens is they torture them so much that their personality splits in order to endure the pain and misery. When their personality splits, they become another person, and it's through this technique that they train them," end quote within quote. Such techniques could, says Gunderson, create Manchurian candidates, unwitting agents of espionage who could courier sensitive messages and even commit assassinations against their will, without any recollections of these events.
End quote. Here in the book is a paragraph that I read in part 1, so I will skip that, and I will include instead a couple minutes from a video clip of the aforementioned FBI agent Ted Gunderson debriefing Paul Bonacci, a Monarch survivor, from the Franklin scandal in Omaha, Nebraska. After the audio clip, I will return directly to reading from Tracy Twyman's book.
feel much better when I had everything in my head. But Zach's group was mainly made up of like a computer system in my head. They were like, all the personalities in them held specific things for containing all the information. They had hypnotic suggestions and stuff. Some of them weren't real personalities. They were just kind of hypnotic ones. That's the ones under Zach. Ones under Alec, not personalities, they're simple, they're just kind of a file system to hold memories of all the other alters and stuff and keep everything from being united into one personality. They try to keep everything from being put into one personality. Alex is he's the controller of that network. And then after him you go into Sean and Ryan, and Sean and Ryan's total purpose was
Sean is Ryan on the master chart.
Yeah, Sean and Ryan down here on the master chart, and they're also up here. Sean had a lot of personality and stuff. They were a lot of them were hypnotic suggestions. They had really no memories and stuff. They just gave names to. I gave them names to simplify and stuff. A lot of them they held like learning how to drive a tank, or.
Well, did you actually know how to drive a tank?
Mm-hmm.
Who taught you that?
That was part of the military training with Monarch.
Okay.
So.
We'll go into that later.
Yeah, and then we got Ryan, and he had abilities too, and they were mostly intelligent and sabotage and learning how to spy on other people and other places, and that was their whole purpose for being created. And then the lost personality, as I call him, is Kelly. But
Kelly's not on here.
Well, Kelly's down here.
Oh, he's over here. You're going back to the satanic.
I got the chart in the wrong place. I thought it was the lost guy that I lost a long time ago. I looked for the wrong name when I was trying to read it. That happens every once in a while.
Quote, although clearly unethical, such practices were justified by the CIA under the belief that the Soviets, America's new archenemy, already possessed such covert weaponry of the mind. Former Nebraska State Senator John DeCamp, author of the book The Franklin Cover-Up, recalls a conversation with former CIA Director William Colby regarding the subject. Quote within quote. What he said was that after the Korean War, the American CIA and the American government, in fact, were very terrified. We believed that the ability of other countries, particularly China, Russia, North Korea, their ability in brainwashing, as it was known at the time, and mind control, was developed to such a degree. You can imagine how dangerous that was, and we decided we couldn't afford to be behind. For the very salvation of the country, we had to catch up. And so millions and billions were poured into these programs. He said, I'll tell you one thing, John. When all is said and done, we were never behind, and we aren't today. End quote within quote. Indeed, according to many self-proclaimed victims of mind control, we are well ahead of the game today, and most say the CIA's motivation was never strictly for the good of the country. For instance, consider the rumored existence of Project Monarch, the alleged offshoot of MKULTRA designed to create legions of so-called mind-controlled sex slaves for use by the rich and powerful. According to conspiracy theorist Fritz Springmeier, the project was called Monarch after the butterfly of the same name. Training begins in early childhood when, he says, quote within quote, children who are traumatized have their legs tied and are electroshocked and tortured until the alters, or personalities, believe they are butterflies, end quote within quote. The whole program is based on the marionette programming purportedly perfected in Nazi Germany with the same aim as Monarch, in which sex slaves were created who believed themselves to be puppets or marionettes controlled by cruel masters. The value of a mind-controlled sex slave is multifaceted. For one thing, they can be used to satisfy the perversions of people in positions of power without jeopardizing that power, since a person under mind control is not likely to expose the event to public scrutiny. Furthermore, these encounters can be videotaped for the purpose of blackmailing public officials and businessmen should they at any time step out of line or do anything to endanger the intelligence community's global plan. Some people who purport the existence of Project Monarch might also believe that the CIA is under the control of the Illuminati New World Order conspiracy of global domination. Then there is the financial aspect. A sex slave can be prostituted from childhood onto wealthy individuals who will pay large sums of money for the experience. They can also be used in child pornography to be sold on the global market. Many Monarch survivors claim that unwanted, expendable sex slaves are picked to star in the most controversial pictures of all, snuff films, the existence of which has yet to be proven according to the FBI. The slaves are also, say the stories, used as drug mules for the CIA's secret trafficking of illegal substances. The money derived from these black market transactions of drugs and sex is used, they say, to fund the CIA's many top-secret and under-budgeted black operations, as well as to line the pockets of the perpetrators. Potential slaves are chosen for their genetic propensity for suggestibility, hypnotizability, dissociation, and high intelligence. In the past 10 years or more, a number of these so-called survivors have recovered their memories and come forward about their past abuses at the hands of the government. Many have written books, such as Bryce Taylor's Thanks for the Memories, The Truth Has Set Me Free, Annie McKenna's Paperclip Dolls, and Kathy O'Brien's The Transformation of America. End quote. I just want to read a bit more of what Tracy has to say before we learn about DID and an early example or two of Project Monarch victims to end the show. Reading on, quote, confirming the validity of another person's memory is nearly impossible, especially if every other person involved in the memory denies that it took place. However, it may perhaps be unfair to label as impossible or ridiculous the memories of other people which merely lie beyond the spectrum of our own experience. Many of us received religious indoctrination from our family as we grew up, and were forced to participate in weird ceremonies that made us uncomfortable. Isn't it logical that if our parents were Satanists or occultists, they might subject us to similar indoctrination? And since satanic and occult practices purportedly bestow worldly power upon their practitioners, isn't it logical that some of our most powerful leaders might participate in such practices? Isn't it logical that they would make use of occult-based mind control techniques such as hypnotism, rituals, mind-altering drugs, and neuro-linguistic programming, i.e. rote memorization of magic words? Techniques that have been traditional components of religious ceremonies from the mystical priesthoods of Babylon, Greece, Rome, and Egypt to the cults of today. The CIA's interest in mind control is well documented, and there was certainly a time in which they had no compunction about subjecting unwitting subjects to experiments that might harm them, or which might go against their intended will. The idea that the CIA would traffic in guns, drugs, and other contraband in order to fund their secret projects is becoming more generally accepted, especially after the San Francisco Chronicle's Gary Webb investigated the funding of Contra Aid in 1996. Furthermore, we know that men in positions of power often require a greater than average number of sexual partners, often choosing extremely young women or men, sometimes prostitutes, to satisfy their often kinky desires. Perhaps this is just a result of the greater than average testosterone levels often found in aggressive power seekers. That the CIA would supply these prostitutes in exchange for their much needed Black Ops funding, and that they would keep these prostitutes mind-controlled into silence using the above-mentioned techniques so as to cover their own tracks, may not be impossible to believe. End quote. It is very important to keep in mind what we just heard as we go on to discover more about projects Monarch, Montauk, and more modern examples of mind control programming. Why should it be difficult to believe in these terrible things when so many of the basic facets are already proven to be true? Think about everything that is coming to surface with the release of the Epstein files. It is extremely important to maintain an open mind and realize that humans are capable of horrific abuses beyond our comprehension. We are going to rely again on Dr. Colin A. Ross's expertise to get an idea of how multiple personalities are formed and DID arises. I will read various paragraphs from the penultimate chapter of The CIA Doctors now. Quote, as I described in my 1997 textbook, there are 4 pathways to multiple personality disorder, now officially named dissociative identity disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. 1. Childhood abuse. 2. Childhood neglect. 3. Factitious. And 4. Iatrogenic. Iatrogenic means created by the therapist. The same 4 pathways may result in partial or incomplete forms of multiple personality called dissociative disorder not otherwise specified. Dissociative identity disorder may arise as 1. A natural response to severe chronic childhood abuse, which may include any combination of physical, sexual, emotional, and verbal abuse. It may be a response to 2. Severe chronic childhood neglect. It may be 3. A factitious disorder, that is, the symptoms may be self-created by a person who wants to get into the patient role. Finally, 4. The disorder may be iatrogenic, which means created by a doctor or therapist. In civilian therapies, iatrogenic dissociative identity is created unwittingly and is malpractice, while in Manchurian candidate programs it is created on purpose. Civilian iatrogenic dissociative identity disorder is grounds for a successful malpractice lawsuit. This fact alone establishes that the Manchurian candidate programs were harmful, unethical, and a violation of human rights. They were designed to create an enduring psychiatric disorder, which is the opposite of what doctors are supposed to do under the Hippocratic Oath and the Nuremberg Code. The reality of iatrogenic multiple personality and the reality of the Manchurian candidate prove each other. If iatrogenic multiple personality actually occurs, and individuals in such cases experience real but iatrogenic amnesia, auditory hallucinations, and post-traumatic stress disorder, then the disorder has been created unwittingly by incompetent, misguided therapists. If therapists can create multiple personality disorder unintentionally, then a skilled mind control doctor should be able to create a Manchurian candidate on purpose. The therapies in which multiple personality is created unwittingly should mimic the conditions and techniques used by Pali Hardrup, Bjorn Nielsen, Donald DeFries, and BLUEBIRD and Artichoke doctors to create Manchurian candidates. In the course of my work as an expert witness, I have encountered 5 cases of relatively pure iatrogenic multiple personality disorder. In each case, I have reviewed medical records, interviewed the person directly, and administered a battery of self-report, computer-scored and structured interview measures, and in several I analyzed the opinions, affidavits, and testimony of the defendants. In one case, I listened to audio tapes of therapy sessions. Additionally, I have attended workshops and talks by some of the defendants and reviewed their published writings. The conclusion that each of the 5 cases was iatrogenic was reached in several ways. Each litigant was making that claim. In all 5 cases, there was no evidence of a dissociative disorder existing prior to therapy in the medical records or in the histories I took. There was abundant evidence of treatment techniques and boundary violations that mimicked the mind control techniques used by destructive cults, Bjorn Nielsen, Donald DeFries, Gilbert Jensen, and BLUEBIRD Artichoke doctors. In the 5 iatrogenic cases, pre-existing diagnoses of bipolar mood disorder were made in 3, and major depressive disorder in the other 2. Self-defeating and or dependent personality disorder were present in all 5 cases. 3 of the 4 iatrogenic cases tested were positive for post-traumatic stress disorder, and in each case the PTSD was caused by false memories and the trauma of therapy. The iatrogenic cases provided extreme examples of massive overutilization of treatment techniques and boundary violations. As I describe in a composite case in my textbook, the treatments mimicked the mind control techniques used by destructive cults and by the mind control doctors who created Manchurian candidates. The treatments included prolonged inpatient admissions lasting as long as 2 years, which imposed conditions of sensory deprivation, sleep and food deprivation, repeated trance induction, isolation from the outside world, control of information, and altered states of consciousness due to drugs. The patients' families of origin were defined as satanic, and all doubts about the reality of the multiple personality or the false memories of satanic ritual abuse were defined as symptoms of cult programming or resistance to treatment. The treatment team had a hierarchical organizational structure with a charismatic leader at the top, just like destructive cults. The treatment violated the methods and principles I recommend in my book, Satanic Ritual Abuse, Principles of Treatment, and it did so to an extreme degree. Boundary violations by the therapist ranged from minor problems to sexual involvement. There was excessive personal disclosure by therapists, and the patients often knew the names of the therapist's spouses and children. The personal beliefs of the therapist about the cult and the therapist's fear and paranoia were well known to the patients. In many cases, the treatment plan was modified to protect the therapist and patient from the cult. Mail was opened by hospital staff and reviewed for secretly implanted triggers. Control of the patient's life space, thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, and interactions was extensive or complete for prolonged periods of time." End quote. The book Secret Weapons, Two Sisters' Terrifying True Story of Sex, Spies, and Sabotage by survivors Cheryl and Lynn Hersha with Dale Griffiths, Ph.D., and Ted Schwartz, contains numerous invaluable documents at its end, including ones from the CIA. This next short excerpt is from a CIA document titled CIA's Research and Development of Mind-Altering Substances from May 5, 1955. Quote, "A portion of the research and development program of TSS/Chemical Division is devoted to the discovery of the following materials and methods. 1. Substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. 2. Substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. 3. Materials which will prevent or counteract the intoxicating effect of alcohol. 4. Materials which will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol. 5. Materials which will produce the signs and systems of recognized diseases in a reversible way so that they may be used for malingering, etc. 6. Materials which will render the indication of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness. 7. Substances which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing. 8. Materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use. 9. Physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use. 10. Substances which produce physical disablement such as paralysis of legs, acute anemia, etc. 11. Substances which will produce pure euphoria with no subsequent letdown. 12. Substances which alter personality structure in such a way that the tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. 13. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. 14. Substances which will lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. 15. Substances which will promote weakness or distortion of the eyesight or hearing faculties, preferably without permanent effects. 16. A knockout pill which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, foods, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc., which will be safe to use, provide the maximum of amnesia, and be suitable for use by agent types on an ad hoc basis. 17. A material which can be surreptitiously administered by the above routes and which in very small amounts will make it impossible for a man to perform a physical activity whatsoever. End quote. Numbers 1, 6, 8, 9, and 12 especially are further proof of the CIA's goals for creating mind-controlled slaves and making them discreditable if they break programming and go public about the abuses they experienced. A July 26, 1963 memorandum on MKUltra activity provides us with even more proof. Quote, experiments on chemical, biological, and radiological materials in clandestine operations to control human behavior. 26 July 1963. Memorandum 4, Director of Central Intelligence. Subject, Report of Inspection of MKUltra. 1. In connection with our survey of Technical Services Division, DDP, it was deemed advisable to prepare the report of the MKUltra program in one copy only, in view of its unusual sensitivity. 2. This report is forwarded herewith. 3. The MKUltra activity is concerned with the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. The end products of such research are subject to very strict controls, including a requirement for the personal approval of the Deputy Director of Plans for any operations use made of these end products. 4. The cryptonym MKUltra encompasses the R&D phase, and a second cryptonym, MK Delta, denotes the DDP system for control of the operational employment of such materials. The provisions of the MKUltra authority is also cover redacted. The administration and control of this latter activity were found to be generally satisfactory and are discussed in greater detail in the main body of the report on TSD. 5. MKUltra was authorized by the then Director of Central Intelligence, Mr. Allen W. Dulles, in 1953. The TSD was assigned responsibility thereby to employ a portion of its R&D budget, eventually set at 20%, for research in behavioral materials and, redacted, under purely internal and compartmented controls. Further details are provided in paragraph 3 of the attached report. Normal procedures for project approval, funding, and accounting were waived. However, special arrangements for audit of expenditures have been evolved in subsequent years. 6. The scope of MKUltra is comprehensive and ranges from the search for and procurement of botanical and chemical substances, through programs for their analysis in scientific laboratories, to progressive testing for effects on animals and human beings. The testing on individuals begins under laboratory conditions, employing every safeguard, and progresses gradually to more and more realistic operational simulations. The program requires and obtains the services of a number of highly specialized authorities in many fields of the natural sciences. 7. The concepts involved in manipulating human behavior are found by many people both within and outside the agency to be distasteful and unethical. There is considerable evidence that opposition intelligence services are active and highly proficient in this field. The experience of TSD to date indicates that both the research and employment of the materials are expensive and often unpredictable in results. Nevertheless, there have been major accomplishments both in research and operational employment. 8. The principal conclusions of the inspections are that the structure and operational controls over this activity need strengthening. Improvements are needed in the administration of the research projects, and some of the testing of substances under simulated operational conditions was judged to involve excessive risk to the agency. 9. Attached for the signature of the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence is a memorandum transmitting the report to the Deputy Director of Plans, requesting a summary of action taken or comments on the recommendations contained therein. Signature of J.S. Ehrman, Inspector General. Attachments as stated. End quote. So, if you are able to parse what they were saying in that memorandum for the Director of Central Intelligence, pretty much they've been making major accomplishments despite how unpredictable and expensive all of these experiments are. And they plan to continue. They just want improvements made. So let's continue. Portions of an article by John Rappaport titled CIA Experiments with Mind Control on Children will bring Germans back into play in our story. Quote, the CIA mind control apparatus has been well known since 1975, when 10 large boxes of documents were released pursuant to Freedom of Information Act requests. Several good books were then written on the subject of the CIA program known as MKULTRA. Officially spanning 10 years from 1952 to 62, MKUltra involved the use of LSD on unwitting military and civilian subjects in the United States. LSD and more powerful compounds were given under duress as brainwashing and truth serum drugs. The program's aim was to find drugs which would irresistibly bring out deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean and program him or her as a robot agent. In experimental test situations, people were given acid without their knowledge, then interrogated under bright lights with doctors sitting in the background taking notes. Threats were made. The test subjects were told that their LSD downer trips would be extended indefinitely if they refused to reveal their closely guarded military secrets. The people being interrogated in this way were CIA employees, U.S. military personnel, and, abroad, agents suspected of working for the other side in the Cold War. Long-term severe debilitation and several documented deaths resulted. Much more could be said about MKUltra. None of this prepared people for the explosive testimony made on March 15, 1995 in Washington, D.C., before the President's Committee on Radiation, however. In unpublicized sessions, New Orleans therapist Valerie Wolf introduced two of her patients who had uncovered memories of being part of extensive CIA brainwashing programs as young children, in one case starting at age 7. Their brainwashing included torture, rape, electroshock, powerful drugs, hypnosis, and death threats. According to their testimony, the CIA then induced amnesia to prevent their recalling these terrifying sessions. Both Wolf and her patients stated that they recovered the memories of this CIA program without regression or hypnosis techniques. In other words, these patients spontaneously discovered this information about themselves and their pasts. Although the committee was mainly concerned with radiation, they permitted Valerie and her patients to testify because, astonishingly, several doctors who had administered the mind control experiments had also been identified by other Americans secretly exposed to radiation. Apparently, there was a crossover. Prominent names surfaced in the March 15th testimony. Richard Helms, former head of the CIA, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who ran MKUltra, and Dr. John Gittinger, Gottlieb's protege. These men and others were directly accused of participating in grisly mind control efforts on children. Predictably, this testimony received no media attention. I now have it all, including many pages submitted to the committee that will likely never be released as part of their final report. Only a small percentage of these pages were read aloud at the hearing. Included are corroborating statements from other therapists across the country and several of their patients. I have now released all of this testimony as a book, U.S. Government Mind Control Experiments on Children. When the sickening shock starts to wear off, deeply disturbing questions flood one's mind. Just what was this CIA program? How extensive was it? What was its purpose? From what I have been able to discover so far, many American children, as well as children from Mexico and South America, were used over a period of about 40 years, starting around 1948. In fact, the program may still be going on. Doctors and agents who administered it wanted to obtain control over the minds of these children, ostensibly to create super agents who wouldn't remember even what missions they carried out, because of hypnotically induced amnesia, which could be removed by their controllers and reinstalled at will. Children were trained as sex agents, for example, with the job of blackmailing prominent Americans, primarily politicians, businessmen, and educators. A great deal of filming was done for this purpose. Eventually, people from the inner core of the CIA program filmed each other, and some of the centers where children were used as sex agents got out of control and turned into CIA-operated sex rings. Some children were considered expendable and simply murdered. One person who states that he was in this program as a child said, off the record, "They tried out their brainwashing techniques on the kids from Mexico and South America. They were considered expendable. But on another echelon of the program, they went after the best and the brightest American kids. Making perfect agents to combat the Soviets wasn't, I don't think, their ultimate objective. I can't remember what that was." At this point, I made a suggestion. Well, if they were choosing the best and brightest, maybe they figured these kids would one day rise to important positions in the society, and they wanted to gain long-term control over them so they would be under their thumb, so they could tap them at will, a way of controlling the future society. Maybe, he said. The Nazis gained control over the intelligentsia in Germany. That was a very key step in their dominance. That was the first thing they did. This smells very much like a Nazi program in the US, I said. I don't mean all the controllers were German, but the style of it, the insanity. He said, they brought over a lot of Nazi doctors after the war, and not just to rockets, for a lot of projects. Other people who said that they had been used as children in the program remember that doctors with German accents were definitely present at the sessions. One therapist who shared this information informally with colleagues around the country states that, so far, the oldest person she has heard of who was in this program is now 52, the youngest is now 9. Since a number of people who were brainwashed, tortured, and drugged in these experiments try to resolve their experiences in therapy, psychiatrists and other professional therapists are hearing these stories. They are told, for example, that CIA controllers sometimes dressed up in satanic costumes to further traumatize the children, also providing a cover that wouldn't be believed if the children ever talked. It is worth noting that there is a movement to discredit these recovered memories, and the most prominent group, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, or FMSF, has several board members with CIA or military intelligence connections, including the notorious Dr. Louis Jolly West of UCLA, who tried to establish a center for the study of violence at the university in the 1970s. This center's specialty would have been psychosurgery, a horrendous melting of brain connections, supposedly to curb people's violent tendencies. FMSF maintains that a person always remembers abuse done to him or her, and therefore any new recovery of it in therapy is false and must have been fabricated through misleading suggestions by the therapist. While it is certainly true that such inducement happens in therapy, the blanket statement that all recovered memory is invented is unsubstantiated. In a written statement to Dr. Wolf that was included in her testimony to the President's Committee, well-known researcher and psychiatrist Colin Ross said, quote, within quote, "Published articles in my files include descriptions of administration of 150 micrograms of LSD to children age 5 to 10 years on a daily basis for days, weeks, months, and in a few cases even years. Neurosurgeons at Tulane, Yale, and Harvard did extensive research on brain electrode implants with intelligence funding and combined brain implants with large numbers of drugs, including hallucinogens," end quote, within quote. Ross based his report on his more than 20 years of investigating CIA mind control. Chris De Nicola, one of Dr. Wolf's patients who testified before the President's Committee, named her controller as Dr. Green, a name reported by several other mind control subjects. End quote. There it is. Doctors with German accents, including one who went by the name Dr. Green. That is the name that Joseph Mengele went by. When we study survivors' stories in greater detail in upcoming episodes, we will find more evidence that this is Joseph Mengele, alive and well for decades after World War II. We will now read Chris De Nicola's statement to the Presidential Commission on Radiation and Mind Control. She was programmed in part by this Dr. Green character. Her story is very similar to that of the survivor I will be interviewing for this podcast very soon. Here is the statement. Quote, March 15th, 1995. Good afternoon. I'm Chris De Nicola, born July of 1962, rendering me 32 years of age. I was a subject in radiation as well as mind control and drug experiments performed by a man I knew as Dr. Green. My parents were divorced around 1966, and Donald Richard Ebner, my natural father, was involved with Dr. Green in the experiments. I was a subject from 1966 to 1976. Dr. Green performed radiation experiments on me in 1970, focusing on my neck, throat, and chest, 1972 focusing on my chest, and my uterus in 1975. Each time I became dizzy, nauseous, and threw up. All these experiments were performed on me in conjunction with mind control techniques and drugs in Tucson, Arizona. Dr. Green was using me mostly as a mind control subject. From 1966 to 1973, his objective was to gain total control of my mind and train me to be a spy, an assassin. The first significant memory took place at Kansas City University in 1966. Don Ebner took me there by plane when my mom was out of town. I was in what looked like a laboratory, and there seemed to be other children. I was strapped down, naked, spread eagle, on a table on my back. Dr. Green had electrodes on my body, including my head. He used what looked like an overhead projector and repeatedly said he was burning different images into my brain while a red light flashed aimed at my forehead. In between each sequence, he used electric shock on my body and told me to go deeper and deeper, while repeating each image would go deeper into my brain, and I would do whatever he told me to do. I felt drugged because he had given me a shot before he started the procedure. When it was over, he gave me another shot. The next thing I remember, I was with my grandparents again in Tucson, Arizona. I was 4 years old. You can see from this experiment that Dr. Green used trauma, drugs, post-hypnotic suggestion, and more trauma in an effort to gain total control of my mind. He used me in radiation experiments both for the purpose of determining the effects of radiation on various parts of the body and to terrorize me as an additional trauma in the mind control experiments. The rest of the experiments took place in Tucson, Arizona, out in the desert. I was taught how to pick locks, be secretive, use my photographic memory to remember things, and a technique to withhold information by repeating numbers to myself. Dr. Green moved on to wanting me to kill dolls that looked like real children. I stabbed a doll with a spear once after being severely tortured, but the next time I refused. He used many torture techniques, but as I got older, I resisted more and more. He often tied me down in a cage, which was near his office. Between 1972 and 1976, he and his assistant were sometimes careless and left the cage unlocked. Whenever physically possible, I snuck out into his office and found files with reports and memos addressed to CIA and military personnel. Included in these files were project, subproject, subject, and experiment names with some code numbers for radiation and mind control experiments, which I have submitted in written documentation. I was caught twice, and Dr. Green tortured me ruthlessly with electric shock, drugs, spinning me on a table, putting shots in my stomach, in my back, dislocating my joints, and hypnotic techniques to make me feel crazy and suicidal. I protected the information by using the technique I had been taught. I repeated to him over and over. They came too quick. I didn't have a chance to see anything. Because of my rebellion and growing lack of cooperation, they gave up on me as a spy and assassin. Consequently, the last 2 years, 1974 to 1976, Dr. Green used various mind control techniques to reverse the spy and assassin messages to self-destruct and death messages. His purpose? He wanted me dead, and I have struggled to stay alive all of my adult life. I believe it is by the grace of God that I am still alive. These horrible experiments have profoundly affected my life. I developed multiple personality disorder because Dr. Green's goal was to split my mind into as many parts as possible so he could control me totally. He failed, but I've had to endure years of constant physical, mental, and emotional pain even to this day. I've been in therapy consistently for 12 years, and it wasn't until I found my current therapist 2.5 years ago who had knowledge of mind control experiments that I've finally been able to make real progress and begin to heal. In closing, I ask that you keep in mind that the memories I've described are but a glimpse of the countless others that took place over the 10 years between 1966 and 1976. That they weren't just radiation, but mind control and drug experiments as well. I have included more detailed information of what I remember in your written documentation. Please help us by recommending an investigation and making the information available so that therapists and other mental health professionals can help more people like myself. I know I can get better. I know others can too with the proper help. Please help us in an effort to prevent these heinous acts from continuing in the future. Thank you. End quote. Just absolutely horrifying and heartbreaking to know that this was done to so many children and adults too. I think we should probably wrap up for today. But before we go, we will read one more thing. It sets up the survivor story we will hear in the future from them personally. It also tells of the sort of experimentation that went on in Stargate and Project Montauk. As we have seen already today, NASA took part in these mind control programs. This document from the back of the Secret Weapons book covers that. Quote, Astronaut reveals NASA mind control program involving children by Andrew D. Basiago, July 21st, 2000, Los Angeles. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts, has confirmed the existence of a mind control program administered by NASA in the 1950s and 1960s involving gifted American schoolchildren. The astronaut's revelation was made during a July 19th interview by host Mike Siegel on the popular late-night radio program Coast to Coast AM. During a discussion that primarily focused on Cooper's beliefs that extraterrestrial beings are visiting planet Earth and that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, Siegel asked Cooper, who were the Space Kids? Cooper answered, the Space Kids were children with exceptional mental abilities, run through a kind of MK program, like the things that are coming out now. He went on to describe how NASA's mind control program, which emphasized cultivation of the children's psychic abilities, consisted of training involving telepathy, remote viewing, and out-of-body experiences, or OBEs. Cooper's comments support the claims of a growing cadre of Americans, now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, who are recovering memories of unusual classes that they were enrolled in as children during the advent of the space age. These study groups included speed reading lessons that enabled students to comprehend entire passages of text at a single glance, the use of learning machines to teach them vast amounts of information, advanced memory training, card games and other situational exercises involving clairvoyance, and rudimentary seminars in the guided imagination that forms the basis of remote viewing. It is believed that NASA's mind control program had as its primary objective the task of preparing children who would later be able to communicate with the non-human intelligent species that humanity might encounter in space. This thesis is supported by the fact that one experiencer remembers being tutored in a hieroglyphic alphabet that author Fritz Springmeier has identified as a set of intergalactic symbols developed by NASA for the purpose of communicating with extraterrestrial civilizations. The accounts of some individuals suggest that in some cases the children involved were given drugs to enhance memory and learning and were physically spun on tabletop-like devices to induce the altered state of consciousness associated with OBEs. End quote.